Imagine, it is the summer of 1868. The heat over the Jordanian plateau presses against the stones at a place called Dibon. A traveler kneels beside a slab of dark, weathered rock half buried in the soil. As the dust falls away, lines of an alphabet that has not been read in nearly 3 millennia rise from the surface, a king's voice, carved by his own command, speaking again. What this stone says is what makes it remarkable. According to Wikipedia, the Mesha Stele is a stele dated around 840 BCE containing a significant Canaanite inscription in the name of King Mesha of Moab. It is, in essence, a victory monument, a king bragging about defeating his enemies. But the enemy he names, and the narrative he tells, would later be matched almost line for line with a story already preserved in the Hebrew Bible, cross-referenced with the 3rd chapter of 2 Kings, where Mesha's rebellion narrative matches the stele. The king who carved this stone wanted to humiliate Israel. Instead, he confirmed it. The stone surfaced in the year 1868, at Dhiban, a site on the high plateau east of the Dead Sea, in what is today the Kingdom of Jordan. Within a few years it had passed through the chaos of antiquities dealers and rival European interests, and by 1874 it had entered the collection of the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it remains today. The inscription itself dates to approximately 840 BCE, the 9th century before the Common Era, according to Wikipedia. The voice on the stone identifies itself as Mesha, king of Moab, a kingdom that occupied the land east of the Dead Sea, in the region known today as Central Jordan. The text is not written in a language unique to itself. According to Wikipedia, it is composed in a variant of the Phoenician alphabet, closely related to the Paleo-Hebrew script. That detail alone is significant. The writing system used by a Moabite king to record his triumph belongs to the same family as the script in which the early books of the Hebrew Bible were first written down. The cultures of Moab and Israel were, in a literal alphabetic sense, neighbors who shared a common toolkit for putting language onto stone. The inscription has also been independently translated by multiple Semiticists since its discovery, a process of careful verification that has continued for more than a century and a half. This is not a single eccentric reading by one scholar. The core content of the text has been read, reread, and confirmed by specialists whose only agenda is the philology of ancient inscriptions. What does the king actually say? According to Wikipedia, Mesha tells how Chemosh, the god of Moab, had been angry with his people and had allowed them to be subjugated to the kingdom of Israel. But at length, Chemosh returned and assisted Mesha to throw off the yoke of Israel and restore the lands of Moab. The king also describes his many building projects. Read those lines slowly. A Moabite king, writing in his own voice, in his own script, on a stone commissioned for his own glory, openly acknowledges that his people were once subjects of the kingdom of Israel. He frames it as a theological problem. His God was angry, but the political reality embedded in the boast is unmistakable. Moab had been under Israelite domination. Mesha's whole reason for carving the stele is that he successfully ended that domination. Imagine, a stonemason in the royal workshop, late afternoon shadows lengthening across the courtyard. Mesha himself dictates the wording. The chisel bites into the surface, and with every blow another line of accusation against Israel, and another line of unintended confirmation, is set down for any future reader to find. This is where the second layer of significance enters. The stele has been cross-referenced with the account preserved in the 3rd chapter of the 2nd book of Kings, and Mesha's rebellion narrative matches the stele. Two completely independent documents, one carved by a Moabite king for his own audience, the other preserved by Israelite scribes in their sacred writings, describe the same political event from opposite sides. The Hebrew Bible records Mesha rebelling against Israel. The stele records Mesha rebelling against Israel. The biblical text and the Moabite king disagree, as you might expect, about whose gods favored whom and whose army was ultimately stronger. But they agree on the underlying historical event, a Moabite king named Mesha, throwing off the political control of the kingdom of Israel, in the 9th century before the Common Era. Beyond the rebellion narrative, the king devotes substantial portions of his inscription to building works, according to Wikipedia. The text reads not only as a war monument but as a public record of administration, towns reconstructed, fortifications raised, infrastructure restored. This is the language of a real king, governing a real territory, in a real political environment. It is the texture of governance, not the vagueness of legend. And it is preserved in an alphabet related to the very script in which his Israelite enemies would record their version of the same events. What the stele cannot tell us is just as important as what it can. A single inscription, carved at the order of a single king, is by definition the propaganda of that king. Mesha's account of events is his account. He is not a neutral observer. He is the man whose reputation depends on the story he is telling. The stone is also, physically, an artifact with limits. Parts of the inscription have been damaged over time, and certain readings of individual lines remain matters of philological debate. One of the most discussed examples involves a fragmentary passage that the French Semiticist André Lemaire argued, in a paper cited by researchers and published in the Biblical Archaeology Review in 1994, contains a reference to the House of David. That reading is not universally accepted. It is cited by researchers in the field as one possible reconstruction of a damaged section, but it should be treated as a contested interpretation, not as a confirmed fact. For deeper academic engagement with the inscription itself, the published study by J. Dhiban, Studies in the Mesha Inscription and Moab, released by Scholars Press in 1989, remains a standard reference. What the stele also does not do is verify miraculous claims. It does not prove the theological framing of either the biblical author or of Mesha himself. Chemosh's anger and Chemosh's return, according to Wikipedia, are religious explanations the king offers for political events. The stone tells us that Mesha believed in that framework, or at least chose to present his rule through it. It does not tell us that the framework was true. What it does establish, what it cannot avoid establishing, is the political and geographic reality those theological frames sit on top of. Moab existed. Israel existed. The two kingdoms interacted. A specific king named Mesha ruled at a specific time, and he told a story that lines up with a story preserved by his enemies. The honest reader has to hold both ends of that, the limits of the artifact, and the weight of what it nevertheless confirms. For anyone trying to evaluate the historical reliability of the Hebrew Bible's account of the Kingdom of Israel, the implications of the Mesha stele are difficult to set aside. We have, in this object, an independent 9th century BCE document, written by a hostile foreign king, in a closely related script family, according to Wikipedia, naming Israel, describing Israelite political domination of his region, and narrating his rebellion against it in a way that has been cross-referenced with a parallel narrative in the 3rd chapter of 2 Kings. This does not turn the Bible into a verified historical record from cover to cover. No single artifact can do that, and the stele does not claim to. What it does is anchor one specific episode, and by extension, the surrounding political world that episode inhabits, in the physical record of the ancient Near East. The framing matters here. The most credible witness to the existence and political behavior of ancient Israel in this period is not an Israelite. It is an enemy king, working to glorify his own God, with no incentive whatsoever to flatter Israel or to confirm Israelite scripture. He confirms the framework anyway. The irony is the point. A monument designed to celebrate Israel's defeat ended up becoming one of the most important pieces of external evidence that the Israelite kingdom against which Mesha defined himself was a real political power in the 9th century before the Common Era. There is a particular kind of credibility in that. When the witness has every motive to deny your existence and instead has to acknowledge it in order to make sense of his own boast, the acknowledgement carries weight that no friendly source could match. The Mesha stele has been read for more than a century and a half now. It still sits in the Louvre, behind glass, in the climate-controlled silence of a museum that did not exist when the stone was carved. The king who commissioned it intended for his name to be remembered, and on that count, he succeeded, far beyond anything he could have imagined. He probably did not intend for his stone to become a reference point in modern debates about biblical historicity. He probably did not imagine that, nearly 3,000 years after the chisel left the rock, his account of throwing off Israel's yoke would be set side by side with the Israelite account, and read as mutual corroboration. So the question to leave with is not what the stone proves about belief. It is what it proves about evidence. If the most reliable external confirmation of a biblical political narrative comes from the king who wanted to humiliate Israel, what does that tell you about how to weigh the rest of the record? And how many other stones, in how many other museum basements and unexcavated sites, might still be waiting to be read in the same way?